Welcome to a journey through the mists of time as we explore the origins of one of the most extraordinary cities in human history, Venice. A city unlike any other, floating atop a network of lagoons, canals, and islands. Venice is a place where every stone, every bridge, and every winding alley tells a story of resilience, ingenuity, and survival. To truly understand Venice, we must go back over 15 centuries, to a time of upheaval, migration, and transformation in the Italian peninsula, when the very fabric of the Western world was unraveling and new civilizations were emerging from the ruins of the old. The story of Venice begins in the 5th century, during the chaotic period following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. The year was around 452 AD, and the Italian mainland was under siege by waves of invasions. The Huns, led by the fearsome Attila, swept across northern Italy, leaving a trail of destruction and fear in their wake. The once mighty cities of the Roman Empire lay in ruins or were under constant threat. Political authority was collapsing, and with it the safety of the people. In this environment of uncertainty and danger, countless individuals, families, and entire communities were forced to flee their homes in search of security. Many turned to the marshy, inhospitable islands of the Venetian Lagoon, a place that others had long considered marginal, uninhabitable, or merely a refuge for fishermen. These early settlers were a mix of refugees, exiles, and survivors, people who had endured the worst of the invasions and were determined to carve out a new life. They arrived on the islands of the lagoon, which at that time were largely untouched, sparsely populated, and surrounded by water, mudflats, and reeds. Life here was far from easy. The islands were exposed to the tides, flooded during storms, and often isolated from the mainland. Yet the geography that made life difficult also provided extraordinary protection. The very wetlands and waterways that seemed inhospitable became natural fortresses, shielding the inhabitants from the barbarians and invaders who roamed the Italian plains. It was in these conditions that the earliest seeds of Venice were sown, a city that would one day rise to become a global power. Building a life on these islands required remarkable ingenuity. The settlers constructed their homes on wooden piles, driven deep into the soft, muddy ground, creating stable foundations where others saw only swamp. These piles, often made of alder, oak, or larch, would harden over time in the water, forming a network of support that remains, in part, beneath Venice to this day. The early Venetians also built simple wooden platforms, connecting their dwellings with narrow boardwalks, and developed rudimentary canals to facilitate transportation and access to fishing and trade. From these modest beginnings, a city was taking shape, one that would eventually defy both nature and the expectations of the wider world. The early Venetian communities were small and scattered, yet they were not isolated from one another. Over time, they began to cooperate, establishing relationships based on mutual support, trade, and shared defense. Life in the lagoon demanded cooperation and careful management of resources. The people had to contend with limited arable land, fluctuating tides, and the constant challenge of keeping their homes and livelihoods safe from floods. In response, they developed innovative techniques for agriculture, aquaculture, and urban planning. Salt marshes were carefully managed, fish and shellfish were farmed, and limited farming on the higher, drier patches of land ensured a measure of food security. These early Venetians learned to live in harmony with their environment, exploiting its advantages while mitigating its challenges. Religion played a central role in the early communities of Venice. As in much of Europe during this era, the Church provided not only spiritual guidance, but also a sense of community and social cohesion. Churches and chapels were among the first permanent structures built on the islands, serving as gathering places, centers of learning, and symbols of hope in a turbulent world. Saints and religious festivals were celebrated with devotion, offering solace to people who had survived invasions, displacement, and hardship. The faith of the early Venetians would continue to shape the city's identity for centuries, intertwining with politics, culture, and daily life in ways that were uniquely Venetian. By the 7th century, Venice had begun to emerge as more than a collection of scattered islands. The communities were connected by wooden bridges and canals, allowing for easier movement of people, goods, and ideas. The lagoon, once seen as a refuge from danger, had become a home, a foundation upon which a city of extraordinary resilience could be built. It was during this period that Venice began to develop its distinctive identity. Unlike the mainland cities that were often ruled by kings, dukes, or external empires, Venice was forging its own path, shaped by the needs of its people and the unique challenges of its environment. The political structure of early Venice reflected this need for cooperation and balance. While records from this period are limited, we know that local councils of elders and community leaders played a crucial role in decision-making. Councils mediated disputes, managed resources, and organized defenses against external threats. Over time, this system would evolve into a complex and remarkably stable government, culminating in the establishment of the Doge, a leader elected by the city's elite, yet constrained by a network of councils and magistrates. This early experimentation with self-governance laid the groundwork for a republic that would endure for over 1,000 years. Trade and commerce were also central to the development of early Venice. Even in its formative years, the city's location on the Adriatic Sea allowed it to act as a bridge between the East and the West. Fishermen and merchants ventured beyond the lagoon, establishing connections with other coastal communities, Byzantium, and eventually the Islamic world. Goods such as salt, fish, and local crafts were exchanged for spices, silks, and luxury items from distant lands. This trade not only enriched the city materially, but also exposed its inhabitants to new ideas, technologies, and cultures, fostering an openness and adaptability that would become hallmarks of Venetian society. Life in the early Venetian islands was shaped as much by water as by human ingenuity. Canals served as streets, while boats replaced carts and horses as the primary means of transport. The ebb and flow of tides dictated the rhythms of daily life, influencing everything from fishing schedules to construction projects. People learned to read the water, understanding the patterns of currents, tides, and floods, and adapting their homes and livelihoods accordingly. This intimate relationship with water would define Venice in every sense, shaping its architecture, its economy, and its culture for centuries to come. The social fabric of early Venice was equally distinctive. Communities were organized around extended families, trade guilds, and religious institutions. Cooperation and mutual aid were essential for survival, and social cohesion was reinforced through shared labor, collective celebrations, and religious observances. Children learned the skills necessary to navigate both the physical environment of the lagoon and the social networks that sustained the community. Skills such as boat building, fishing, and trade were passed down through generations, ensuring continuity and resilience in the face of adversity. By the 8th century, Venice had begun to assert itself beyond the confines of the lagoon. The city established formal relations with powerful neighbors, including the Byzantine Empire, from which it derived both protection and legitimacy. Venice became a center of regional trade and diplomacy, leveraging its strategic location to secure favorable agreements and maintain a degree of independence unusual for a city of its size. These early diplomatic successes demonstrated the city's growing sophistication and foreshadowed its emergence as a maritime power in the centuries to come. Culturally, Venice was already beginning to develop the traits that would define it for the rest of its history. The interplay of East and West, the blending of diverse peoples and traditions, and the constant negotiation with the natural environment all contributed to a unique Venetian identity. Art, architecture, and craftsmanship flourished in the early communities, with local materials and techniques adapted to the watery environment. Wooden structures were reinforced with stone where possible. Decorative elements reflected both Byzantine and Italian influences, and practical innovations, such as elevated walkways and water gates, became standard features of urban life. As the centuries progressed, Venice's population grew steadily. What had started as a small collection of refugee settlements became a thriving network of islands, each with its own character, economy, and governance. The lagoon itself became a vital resource, providing food, transport, and strategic advantage. The people of Venice had learned to thrive where others might have perished, transforming a hostile environment into the foundation of one of history's most remarkable cities. Even in these early centuries, the spirit of Venice was apparent, a city built not on conquest, but on adaptation, resilience, and ingenuity. A city that valued cooperation, commerce, and culture. A city that embraced both the risks and opportunities of its watery environment. This foundation, laid over centuries of trial, error, and persistence, would enable Venice to grow into a maritime empire, a center of art and learning, and a beacon of human achievement in a world of uncertainty and change. The origins of Venice are a story of survival and vision. They remind us that history is not only shaped by kings, battles, or empires, but by ordinary people responding to extraordinary circumstances. The refugees who fled to the lagoon, who built homes on piles, who learned to navigate the tides and trade with distant lands, were the true architects of Venice. Their legacy is visible today in the canals, the bridges, the palaces, and the very spirit of the city. From these humble beginnings in the 5th century, Venice began a journey that would span over a millennium, transforming from a refuge of marshes and reeds into a city of unparalleled beauty, influence, and resilience. The foundations laid by those early settlers were more than physical. They were cultural, social, and political, setting the stage for Venice to become the legendary city we know today. In understanding these origins, we gain insight not only into the city itself, but into the extraordinary human capacity to adapt, endure, and flourish against the odds. By the 9th and 10th centuries, Venice had begun to emerge from its humble beginnings as a refuge for exiles and refugees into a city of increasing influence, organization, and ambition. The scattered settlements that had first been established on the islands of the lagoon were now forming a more coherent society. The wooden bridges that connected the islands had been reinforced. Canals were widened and deepened, and the city's inhabitants were learning how to navigate not only the waters that surrounded them, but also the complex networks of politics, trade, and diplomacy that would define Venice for centuries to come. The leadership of the city during this period became more formalized. The figure of the Doge, or Duke, had been established as the symbolic and political head of Venice. This office was unique in the medieval world. Unlike kings or emperors, who often ruled with absolute authority, the Doge's power was carefully balanced by councils, magistrates, and assemblies composed of the city's leading families. This system was designed to prevent the concentration of power in the hands of one person, while ensuring that the city could act decisively in matters of trade, diplomacy, and defense. The earliest doges were tasked not only with governance but also with protecting the city's fragile independence, negotiating with neighboring powers, and managing the emerging trade networks that were already beginning to link Venice with the wider Mediterranean world. Trade became the lifeblood of Venice during this period. Its location on the Adriatic Sea provided an unparalleled advantage. Ships could sail east toward Byzantium, south toward the rich markets of the Islamic world, or west toward the Italian mainland and beyond. Venetian merchants began to develop a reputation for reliability, shrewdness, and innovation, establishing trade networks that extended across the Mediterranean. The city's wealth grew steadily, as goods such as salt, fish, wool, and wine were exchanged for luxury items including spices, silks, perfumes, and precious metals. This commercial success was not accidental. It was the result of careful planning, negotiation, and the establishment of legal and financial systems that allowed merchants to operate with security and confidence. By the 9th century, Venice had also begun to assert itself militarily. While the city's marshy location provided natural defenses, the Venetians understood that maintaining independence required the ability to protect themselves on the water. Shipbuilding became a vital industry, and Venice's early arsenals were among the most advanced in the Mediterranean. The city's navy, initially composed of small, agile vessels suited for defense and patrol, began to expand, eventually becoming a formidable force capable of projecting power across the Adriatic. Venetian sailors were renowned for their skill, discipline, and courage, and their knowledge of the sea became one of the city's most important assets. The Venetian Republic, known as La Serenissima, was beginning to take shape during this era. The term itself, meaning the most serene republic, reflects the city's self-image as a stable, orderly, and prosperous state. Unlike many other medieval polities, Venice was governed by a combination of oligarchic rule and civic participation. Wealthy merchant families wielded influence through councils and magistracies, while the Doge served as a figurehead and administrator, whose authority was checked by a complex network of laws and traditions. This system allowed Venice to remain independent in a world dominated by powerful empires, kingdoms, and city-states. It also ensured continuity, enabling the city to endure political upheavals, economic challenges, and military threats that might have destroyed less adaptable states. During the 9th and 10th centuries, Venice also established formal relations with the Byzantine Empire. These ties were mutually beneficial. Venice received recognition and protection from Constantinople, which allowed the city to expand its influence and secure favorable trading privileges. In return, Venice provided ships, supplies, and military assistance to the Byzantines when needed. This relationship with one of the most powerful empires of the medieval world allowed Venice to operate with a degree of independence unusual for a city of its size, while also exposing it to the wealth, culture, and sophistication of the Byzantine world. The influence of Byzantine art, architecture, and administrative practices would leave a lasting imprint on Venetian society, contributing to the city's unique cultural identity. As Venice's commercial networks expanded, so too did its social and economic structures. Trade required not only ships and sailors, but also merchants, bankers, craftsmen, and legal experts. Guilds were established to regulate various trades, ensuring quality, fairness, and the transmission of specialized skills. Banking institutions emerged to facilitate the flow of capital, providing loans and credit that allowed merchants to undertake long-distance trade ventures. The Venetian economy became increasingly sophisticated, combining elements of local production with international commerce. Wealth began to concentrate in the hands of merchant families, who would dominate the city's politics, patronage networks, and cultural life for centuries. Venice's rise as a maritime power was not without challenges. The city's location, while advantageous, also made it vulnerable to piracy, storms, and territorial disputes. The Adriatic Sea was a contested space, with rival powers vying for control over trade routes and strategic ports. Venetian leaders had to be adept negotiators and shrewd strategists, balancing diplomacy with military readiness. Alliances were forged, treaties were signed, and sometimes wars were fought to protect the city's interests. These experiences honed the skills of Venetian diplomats and commanders, establishing a tradition of prudence, cunning, and adaptability that would characterize the Republic for centuries. Culturally, this period saw the beginnings of what would become Venice's distinctive identity. The city's position at the crossroads of East and West exposed it to a remarkable variety of influences. Byzantine, Arabic, and Western European ideas, goods, and artistic styles all found their way into the city, blending in ways that were uniquely Venetian. Artisans experimented with new techniques, religious practices incorporated diverse traditions, and architecture began to reflect a synthesis of forms that combined practicality with elegance. Even in these early centuries, Venice was a city of openness, innovation, and creativity, a place where the challenges of geography and politics inspired ingenuity rather than fear or stagnation. One of the most striking aspects of Venice's rise during this period was its ability to balance commerce, governance, and defense. The city's leaders understood that economic prosperity was inseparable from political stability and military strength. Investments in naval power, fortifications, and legal infrastructure were carefully coordinated with the growth of trade networks and financial systems. The result was a city that was remarkably resilient, capable of withstanding shocks that might have devastated other polities. Whether faced with external threats, internal disputes, or economic fluctuations, Venice's institutions provided a framework for stability and continuity. Religious life remained central to Venetian society. Churches and monasteries were not only spiritual centers but also hubs of education, charity, and social organization. Pilgrimages, festivals, and rituals reinforced social cohesion and provided a sense of identity and purpose. Venice's leaders were careful to maintain close ties with the church while also asserting the city's independence in secular matters. This balance between faith and governance contributed to the city's stability and helped establish a cultural foundation that would support Venice's later achievements in art, learning, and diplomacy. Education and literacy also began to expand during this period. While the majority of the population remained focused on practical skills such as navigation, shipbuilding, and trade, a growing elite pursued studies in law, mathematics, languages, and administration. These individuals played critical roles in managing the city's complex trade networks, negotiating treaties, and administering justice. The combination of practical and intellectual skills created a society capable of both innovation and careful governance, a hallmark of Venice's enduring success. As Venice's influence grew, so did its reputation across the Mediterranean. By the 10th century, merchants, travelers, and diplomats recognized the city not only for its wealth, but also for its strategic importance and stability. Venetian ships could be found in ports across the Adriatic, the Aegean, and beyond, carrying goods, information, and influence. Venice had become a nexus of commerce and culture, a city whose power derived not from conquest or brute force, but from its mastery of trade, diplomacy, and organization. The natural environment of Venice continued to shape the city's development. Canals were deepened and expanded to accommodate larger vessels, while levees and embankments were reinforced to protect against flooding. The lagoon itself was carefully managed, with fishing, salt production, and navigation all coordinated to maximize resources while minimizing risk. The people of Venice developed a deep understanding of the tides, the currents, and the complex ecology of their surroundings, allowing them to thrive where others might have struggled. The societal structures of Venice also reflected the city's growing complexity. Families were organized around trade networks and guilds, with wealth and influence concentrated among a relatively small number of elite lineages. These families competed and collaborated, shaping the city's politics, commerce, and culture. Marriage, inheritance, and business partnerships were carefully managed to maintain status and consolidate power, ensuring that Venice's governing class remained stable and capable of steering the city through both prosperity and crisis. By the end of the 10th century, Venice had transformed from a collection of isolated lagoon settlements into a cohesive, thriving maritime city-state. Its economy was robust, its navy capable, its governance sophisticated, and its culture distinctive. The foundations laid during this period would support Venice's rise to unprecedented power in the centuries to come, as it became not only a dominant force in the Mediterranean, but also a global center of commerce, diplomacy, and art. The story of Venice in these early centuries is a testament to human ingenuity, adaptability, and resilience. From refugees fleeing invasion to merchants negotiating trade across continents, from shipbuilders mastering the waters of the Adriatic to leaders creating a stable and enduring political system, every aspect of the city's rise reflects the capacity of people to turn adversity into opportunity. Venice's growth was neither accidental nor inevitable. It was the result of careful planning, strategic vision, and the persistent effort of generations who understood that survival required both courage and foresight. In examining this period of Venice's history, we gain insight not only into the city itself, but into the broader dynamics of medieval Europe. Venice's success illustrates the interplay between geography, commerce, governance, and culture, showing how a city could thrive in a challenging environment through ingenuity, cooperation, and vision. It also highlights the importance of maritime trade in shaping political and economic power, and the ways in which a city could leverage its location and skills to exert influence far beyond its immediate borders. Ultimately, the rise of Venice in the 9th and 10th centuries set the stage for its emergence as a maritime empire, a cultural powerhouse, and a symbol of human achievement. The lessons of this period, the value of adaptability, the importance of strategic vision, and the power of cooperation would resonate throughout Venice's long history, shaping its destiny for centuries to come. The early Venetians may have begun as refugees and survivors, but they laid the foundations for a city that would one day dominate the Mediterranean, inspire generations of artists and thinkers, and become a legend in its own time. By the 13th century, Venice had ascended to a level of power, wealth, and influence that few cities in Europe, or indeed the world, could rival. The modest settlements that had first emerged on marshy islands centuries earlier had transformed into a thriving metropolis, a city whose reach extended far beyond the Adriatic into the Mediterranean and even to distant lands. Venice, La Serenissima, the most serene republic, had become more than a city. It was a symbol of ingenuity, commerce, diplomacy, and culture, a place where the currents of trade and the tides of history intersected in ways that would shape the medieval and early modern worlds. At the heart of Venice's golden age was its mastery of the sea. By the 13th century, Venetian ships sailed to ports across the Mediterranean, from Constantinople to Alexandria, from the Levant to North Africa, and even further afield. The city's maritime network was unmatched in both scale and sophistication. Venetian merchants transported silk, spices, gold, and precious stones, while Venetian shipbuilders constructed vessels that were faster, stronger, and more maneuverable than almost any others in the region. The city's arsenals, immense warehouses of wood, ropes, sails, and weaponry, were centers of innovation and production, capable of outfitting fleets for trade or war at a moment's notice. This maritime dominance was both a source of wealth and a tool of power. Venice did not rely on the traditional methods of conquest favored by kingdoms and empires. Instead, it used commerce and diplomacy to project influence. Venetian envoys negotiated trade agreements, established colonies, and ensured that rival powers could not easily compete with the city's merchants. The strategic placement of Venetian garrisons in key ports and the establishment of permanent trading communities across the Mediterranean allowed the city to maintain control over the flow of goods, knowledge, and culture. Venice had effectively transformed its commerce into a form of soft power, using wealth, influence, and naval strength to maintain autonomy and project authority far beyond its lagoon. Internally, Venice's governance had evolved into a system of remarkable complexity and stability. The Doge, elected for life by the city's aristocratic families, remained the symbolic head of state, but real power was carefully balanced among councils, committees, and magistrates. The Great Council, composed of members from the city's elite families, wielded legislative authority, while the Council of Ten, a secretive body, oversaw security, intelligence, and law enforcement. Other specialized magistracies handled finances, naval affairs, and diplomatic relations. This intricate network of governance ensured that Venice could make decisions efficiently while minimizing the risk of corruption or the concentration of power in a single individual. It also created continuity, allowing the city to endure through centuries of war, economic fluctuation, and shifting alliances. The wealth generated by trade enabled Venice to become a center of artistic and architectural innovation. Palaces rose along the Grand Canal, their facades a dazzling display of Gothic, Byzantine, and Renaissance influences. The Doge's palace, Palazzo Ducale, became a symbol not only of political authority but of aesthetic and cultural sophistication, its arches, courtyards, and halls reflecting the wealth and vision of the city. Churches such as San Marco Basilica, with its golden mosaics and intricate domes, served both spiritual and civic functions, demonstrating the fusion of religious devotion and state power that characterized Venice. These architectural achievements were not merely decorative, they were a statement of Venice's identity, a visual representation of a city that combined beauty, functionality, and authority in a way that few others could match. Art flourished in Venice during this period as well. The city became a magnet for painters, sculptors, and craftsmen who were drawn by the patronage of the wealthy elite. Artists such as Titian, Tintoretto, and Bellini transformed Venetian painting, experimenting with color, perspective, and composition to produce works that captured both the grandeur of the city and the subtleties of human emotion. Religious scenes, portraits, and historical narratives were infused with a vibrancy and realism that were uniquely Venetian, reflecting the city's cosmopolitan nature and its engagement with the wider world. Public and private commissions alike transformed Venice into a living gallery, where the streets, canals, and churches displayed the artistic achievements of its citizens and visitors. The city's prosperity also fostered a flourishing of intellectual life. Scholars, diplomats, and merchants traveled widely, bringing back knowledge of geography, mathematics, languages, and sciences. Libraries and scriptoria preserved classical texts, while new works were composed on subjects ranging from philosophy to commerce. Venice became a center of learning, where practical knowledge and intellectual inquiry went hand in hand. This combination of commercial savvy and scholarly pursuit helped maintain the city's edge in both economic and political arenas, ensuring that Venice remained adaptable, innovative, and competitive in an increasingly interconnected world. Culturally, Venice's identity was shaped by its position at the crossroads of East and West. Byzantine, Arabic, and Western European influences mingled freely, creating a society that was both cosmopolitan and distinctly Venetian. The city absorbed ideas, technologies, and artistic styles from diverse regions, integrating them into its own traditions. This openness contributed to Venice's resilience and creativity, allowing it to adopt innovations without losing its sense of self. The city became a hub where trade, diplomacy, religion, and art intersected, producing a vibrant and dynamic culture that was admired and envied across Europe and the Mediterranean. Venice's economic system was equally sophisticated. Merchants formed guilds to regulate trade, maintain quality, and transmit specialized skills across generations. Banking and credit networks allowed for the financing of long-distance trade, providing capital for ventures that could span months or even years. The city developed legal codes and commercial regulations that protected contracts, resolved disputes, and ensured predictability in business dealings. This combination of financial infrastructure, legal oversight, and social organization created an environment in which commerce could flourish with remarkable security and efficiency. Despite its wealth and stability, Venice remained vigilant. The city faced threats from rival states, pirates, and empires seeking to challenge its dominance. Venice's leaders were adept at balancing diplomacy with military readiness, forging alliances when advantageous and mobilizing fleets when necessary. Naval engagements, fortified outposts, and strategic marriages all played a role in maintaining the city's position. Venice's success lay not only in its ability to project power, but also in its foresight, patience, and skill in navigating the complex political landscape of the Mediterranean. Religion continued to be central to Venetian life, intertwining with politics, culture, and daily existence. The church provided moral guidance, social cohesion, and legitimacy for the city's rulers, while religious festivals, processions, and ceremonies reinforced civic identity and pride. Venice's leaders invested in religious architecture and art, recognizing that spiritual grandeur could reflect and enhance political and cultural authority. Churches were not merely places of worship, they were stages on which the city displayed its wealth, taste, and sophistication, creating an environment where faith and civic pride reinforced one another. The Venetian Republic's social structure was a key factor in its stability and longevity. Wealthy merchant families held influence across political, economic, and cultural spheres, while common citizens, artisans, and laborers contributed to the city's economic engine and daily functioning. Social mobility was limited but not impossible. Skill, innovation, and commerce could allow individuals and families to rise in prominence. The intricate network of patronage, marriage alliances, and professional associations created a web of interdependence that strengthened the city's cohesion and resilience. Venice's golden age also saw the city exert influence far beyond its immediate territory. Its merchants established permanent trading colonies in distant ports, bringing Venetian goods, culture, and legal practices with them. These outposts served not only commercial purposes but also diplomatic and strategic ones, creating a network of influence that stretched across the Mediterranean. Venice became a bridge between cultures, a place where ideas, commodities, and people flowed in all directions, reinforcing the city's centrality in the medieval world. City's wealth and sophistication allowed for significant public works. Canals were expanded, bridges constructed, and public squares redesigned to accommodate growing commerce and population. Sanitation systems, water management projects, and urban planning reflected both practical needs and civic pride. Venice became a model of urban ingenuity, where engineering, architecture, and aesthetics were integrated to create a functional yet beautiful city. Venice's maritime empire was not limited to trade. The city's influence extended to military, political, and cultural spheres. Venetian fleets defended commercial routes, protected allies, and projected power when necessary. Treaties and alliances ensured that Venice could negotiate from a position of strength, while the city's legal and diplomatic expertise allowed it to maintain autonomy in a region dominated by larger powers. This combination of economic, military, and diplomatic skill made Venice a formidable actor in the medieval and early modern world. Culturally, Venice became synonymous with innovation, elegance, and sophistication. Its music, literature, and visual arts reflected the city's cosmopolitan character, blending influences from East and West. Venetian theaters and public spaces hosted performances that celebrated civic pride, religious devotion, and artistic achievement. Festivals, pageants, and public ceremonies reinforced a sense of shared identity, uniting the city's diverse population in a celebration of both local tradition and international engagement. By the 16th century, Venice had become a city of unparalleled prestige. Its wealth and power were admired across Europe, and its cultural achievements were celebrated far and wide. The city's architecture, art, literature, and music set standards that influenced other European centers, while its commercial and diplomatic networks ensured that Venice remained a hub of global exchange. This golden age represented the culmination of centuries of careful planning, innovation, and adaptability, as Venice transformed from a humble refuge into a thriving maritime empire and a beacon of culture and civilization. Yet even at its height, Venice was aware of the fragility of its position. The city's leaders understood that wealth, power, and influence were never guaranteed. External threats, economic fluctuations, and political challenges required constant vigilance, strategic thinking, and adaptability. The success of Venice lay not only in its achievements, but in its ability to anticipate and respond to change, a skill that would allow it to endure far longer than many other city-states and empires of its era. In examining Venice during its golden age, we see a city that was extraordinary not only for its wealth or power, but for its integration of commerce, culture, governance, and society. Venice demonstrates how a community can thrive in a challenging environment, using innovation, cooperation, and strategic vision to create a lasting legacy. The city's achievements in art, architecture, law, diplomacy, and trade were all interconnected, each reinforcing the others and contributing to a society capable of remarkable resilience and creativity. Venice at the height of its power was more than a city, it was a civilization, a network of people, ideas, and institutions that together created something unique in the history of the world. Its canals, palaces, and churches reflected both beauty and function. Its fleets and merchants reflected power and ingenuity. Its scholars and artists reflected creativity and vision. The city's identity was shaped by centuries of adaptation, innovation, and ambition, producing a society that balanced tradition with progress, local pride with global engagement, and commerce with culture. This golden age of Venice is a story of human achievement, a testament to the ability of people to build something enduring in the face of challenges. It reminds us that the greatest cities are not defined solely by their wealth or power, but by their vision, their culture, and their capacity to adapt, innovate, and inspire. Venice at its height represents the pinnacle of this achievement, a city whose influence and legacy continue to captivate the world even centuries later. Even at the height of its power, Venice faced challenges that tested the city's resilience, ingenuity, and determination. The wealth, influence, and prestige the city had accumulated over centuries could not insulate it from the harsh realities of geography, politics, disease, and war. The very location that had allowed Venice to thrive, its position in the protected but exposed lagoon, also posed constant threats. The city's people lived at the mercy of the tides, storms, and floods that shaped the lagoon, and over time they would come to understand that survival in such a precarious environment demanded foresight, skill, and adaptability. One of the most persistent threats to Venice was the natural environment itself. The lagoon, while providing protection from invaders, presented constant challenges for habitation, commerce, and infrastructure. Storm surges could inundate streets and homes, and the accumulation of silt and mud required continual maintenance of canals and waterways. Wooden foundations had to be monitored and replaced periodically, while the rising waters demanded innovations in construction and urban planning. Venetians developed elaborate systems of levees, embankments, and canal engineering, all designed to maintain the delicate balance between land and water. Their ability to manipulate their environment, to create stability in the midst of uncertainty, became a defining feature of the city. Yet it was not only the forces of nature that threatened Venice. The city's prosperity made it a target for both nearby and distant powers. Rival Italian city-states, including Genoa and Pisa, frequently challenged Venetian dominance over trade routes and maritime territories. The Adriatic Sea, far from being a peaceful thoroughfare for commerce, was a contested arena in which rival fleets clashed, alliances shifted, and fortunes were won or lost. Venice's leaders understood that their economic power was inseparable from their military strength, and they invested heavily in shipbuilding, naval training, and strategic outposts along critical maritime corridors. The Venetian navy became a symbol of the city's resilience, a force capable of defending its commerce, projecting influence, and deterring aggression. One of the defining challenges of this period, however, was disease. Venice's dense population, combined with its position as a hub of international trade, made it particularly vulnerable to outbreaks of plague and other contagious illnesses. Epidemics swept through the city with terrifying regularity, leaving devastation in their wake. The most infamous outbreak occurred in 1630, during what came to be known as the Italian Plague. Estimates suggest that tens of thousands of Venetians perished, decimating families, disrupting commerce, and leaving an indelible mark on the city's social and cultural fabric. Plagues were not just medical crises. They were economic, social, and psychological upheavals that tested the very cohesion of Venetian society. In response to these recurring outbreaks, Venice became a pioneer in public health and disease management. The city established the lazaretti, or quarantine stations, on islands such as Lazaretto Nuovo and Lazaretto Vecchio, where ships and travelers suspected of carrying disease were isolated. Merchants and sailors were subjected to rigorous inspections, and strict protocols were implemented to limit the spread of infection. Venice's approach to public health reflected a pragmatic understanding of risk and prevention, and it would influence practices in other cities across Europe. The city's ability to combine vigilance, regulation, and scientific observation allowed it to endure epidemics that might have destroyed other urban centers. Political and military threats compounded the challenges posed by nature and disease. Venice was frequently involved in conflicts with powerful neighbors, including the Ottoman Empire, France, and Austria. Its maritime empire required constant vigilance, as trade routes could be threatened, colonies attacked, and alliances shifted without warning. Venice's leaders had to negotiate these treacherous waters with a combination of diplomacy, strategy, and occasional military action. Treaties were carefully crafted to protect commercial interests, while strategic marriages, gift exchanges, and alliances helped maintain fragile balances of power. Venice's survival in such a turbulent geopolitical environment was a testament to its sophisticated understanding of both local and international dynamics. The rivalry with the Ottoman Empire was particularly significant. The Ottomans controlled key ports and trade routes in the eastern Mediterranean, making them both a partner and a competitor to Venetian interests. Venice relied on diplomacy to maintain favorable relations while preparing for the possibility of conflict. Venetian merchants traded extensively in Ottoman-controlled territories, exchanging European goods for spices, silk, and other luxury items. At the same time, Venetian naval forces were ready to defend their holdings and ensure that rivals could not disrupt the flow of commerce. This delicate balance between cooperation and competition exemplified Venice's strategic acumen and its ability to thrive in a complex international system. Internally, Venice had to manage its own social and political challenges. The oligarchic system of government, which had ensured stability for centuries, was not immune to tension and conflict. Elite families competed for influence, wealth, and prestige, while the Council of Ten and other magistracies monitored potential threats to public order. Venice developed sophisticated mechanisms of surveillance, intelligence, and legal enforcement to maintain social cohesion and prevent conspiracies. Political life in the city was a delicate dance, balancing transparency and secrecy, cooperation and competition, trust and vigilance. The city's stability in the face of internal pressures was as remarkable as its resilience against external threats. Despite these challenges, Venice's cultural and economic life continued to flourish. The city's wealth enabled continued investment in architecture, art, and public works, even in times of crisis. Palaces, churches, and public squares were maintained and expanded, reflecting both civic pride and the desire to project stability and prosperity. The arts became a means of asserting identity and continuity, a reassurance to citizens and visitors alike that Venice remained powerful, sophisticated, and enduring. Paintings, mosaics, and sculptures often commemorated the city's resilience, depicting saints, leaders, and naval victories as symbols of collective strength and virtue. Trade, the lifeblood of Venice, continued to adapt to challenges. Merchants developed networks that could respond to disruptions caused by war, disease, or piracy. Insurance mechanisms, contracts, and financial instruments were refined to manage risk, allowing commerce to continue even in the face of uncertainty. Venice's ability to maintain trade under adverse conditions reinforced its economic dominance and provided resources to address other crises, from naval defense to public health. Cities' merchants were not merely traders, they were strategists, risk managers, and diplomats, shaping Venice's trajectory in both commerce and politics. Plague, war, and political intrigue were not the only threats. Venice also faced environmental challenges, including the gradual erosion of the lagoon, shifting tides, and the accumulation of sediment that threatened navigation and land use. Engineers, planners, and laborers worked continuously to manage canals, reinforce embankments, and maintain infrastructure. The city's interaction with its environment was active and ongoing, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of engineering, hydrology, and urban planning. This relationship with nature was not passive. Venetians shaped their surroundings to ensure the city's survival and prosperity. Socially, Venice was tested by inequality and demographic changes. Wealth was concentrated among elite families, while laborers, artisans, and lower-class citizens faced economic pressures and vulnerability to disease. The government implemented policies to manage social tensions, including charitable programs, guild oversight, and regulation of markets. Religious institutions played a key role in maintaining social cohesion, offering education, charity, and moral guidance. Venice's ability to balance the needs of different social groups contributed to its enduring stability, even in times of crisis. Despite the constant challenges, Venice demonstrated extraordinary resilience. The city's governance, infrastructure, economy, and culture were designed to withstand shocks and adapt to changing circumstances. Leaders learned from each epidemic, war, or environmental disaster, refining policies, improving defenses, and innovating solutions. Venice's resilience was not accidental. It was the product of centuries of experience, careful planning, and a culture that valued prudence, foresight, and collective responsibility. Religious life continued to provide both solace and structure. The city's churches, monasteries, and confraternities played central roles in public life, offering spiritual guidance, education, and support during crises. Religious festivals and rituals reinforced civic identity and social cohesion, providing a sense of continuity and stability in a world marked by uncertainty. Saints and patron figures were invoked for protection against plague, storm, and conflict, creating a symbolic framework that complemented practical measures of governance and defense. The Venetian approach to governance and resilience became a model admired across Europe. Scholars, diplomats, and merchants observed how a city could maintain independence, manage risk, and prosper despite constant threats. Venice demonstrated that power need not rely solely on military conquest. Commerce, diplomacy, public health, and social cohesion could be equally effective tools in ensuring survival and influence. This integrated approach allowed Venice to endure when other city-states faltered, and it laid the groundwork for its continued prominence into the modern era. In addition to these structural and institutional strategies, Venice relied on a culture of vigilance and adaptability. Citizens and leaders alike understood that the city's survival depended on constant attention to threats, whether from nature, disease, or human rivals. Information networks, intelligence gathering, and communication systems were carefully developed to anticipate problems and coordinate responses. This culture of preparedness, combined with practical measures in engineering, commerce, and public health, allowed Venice to navigate centuries of uncertainty with remarkable skill. The city's artistic and cultural achievements continued even under adversity. Painters, sculptors, and architects produced works that celebrated Venice's resilience, maritime power, and civic pride. Public spaces were adorned with monuments, mosaics, and inscriptions commemorating victories over plagues, floods, and foreign threats. These artistic expressions were not mere decoration, They were assertions of identity, continuity, and confidence in the face of challenges. Venice's culture, deeply intertwined with its history of resilience, communicated a sense of enduring strength and civic purpose. By the 17th century, Venice had faced numerous waves of plague, wars, and political pressures, yet it remained a center of commerce, culture, and maritime power. The city had learned to adapt, innovate, and recover from crises. Its experience demonstrated that resilience was not a matter of chance, but of preparation, organization, and foresight. Venice's ability to maintain stability and prosperity under adverse conditions remains one of the most remarkable aspects of its history, illustrating how human ingenuity can overcome even the most persistent challenges. Ultimately, the story of Venice during this period is a story of perseverance, adaptation, and skillful management of both natural and human threats. The city's leaders, merchants, artisans, and citizens all contributed to its endurance, using intelligence, cooperation, and innovation to navigate a world full of uncertainty. Venice was tested repeatedly by plague, war, rivalry, and environmental challenges, yet it emerged each time with its independence, identity, and vitality intact. Through its approach to governance, commerce, public health, and culture, Venice demonstrated that power and resilience could coexist with beauty, sophistication, and artistic achievement. The city's experience during these centuries provides a timeless lesson in the importance of foresight, planning, and collective effort. It is a story of a city that faced constant adversity yet refused to yield, a city that turned vulnerability into strength, and a city that became a model of resilience for generations to come. Venice's ability to navigate these challenges laid the groundwork for both its continued influence in the Mediterranean and its enduring legacy in history. Even as the city confronted plagues, wars, and political rivals, it maintained its commerce, its art, and its culture, ensuring that each generation could build upon the achievements of the last. The lessons of adaptation, innovation, and strategic foresight would carry Venice forward into its later periods of change and decline, providing the foundation for a civilization that would captivate the world for centuries. The story of Venice, like that of all great civilizations, is not only one of growth, triumph, and innovation, but also one of decline, transformation, and adaptation. By the 17th century, the city that had once dominated the Mediterranean both economically and culturally began to encounter challenges that would slowly erode its power and influence. Yet even in decline, Venice demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt, preserve its identity, and maintain a cultural and artistic legacy that would endure for centuries. Understanding this period of Venice's history requires exploring the complex interplay of global trade shifts, political upheaval, military challenges, and internal transformations that reshaped the Serenissima. One of the most significant factors in Venice's decline was the transformation of global trade routes. During its golden age, Venice had prospered as the central hub connecting Europe with the East. Venetian merchants transported spices, silk, precious metals, and luxury goods from the Middle East and Asia to European markets. The city's location on the Adriatic and its mastery of maritime trade allowed it to control these lucrative routes and generate immense wealth. However, the 15th and 16th centuries brought profound changes. The discovery of the Americas and new sea routes to Asia, particularly the voyage of Vasco da Gama around the Cape of Good Hope, shifted trade away from the Mediterranean. European powers such as Portugal, Spain, and later the Dutch and English established direct maritime links to Asia, bypassing Venice and other Mediterranean intermediaries. This global realignment of commerce reduced the city's economic dominance and gradually diminished the profits that had sustained its military, political, and cultural power for centuries. The economic impact of these shifts was compounded by competition from other Italian and European cities. Genoa, Florence, and later Amsterdam and London began to compete more effectively in trade and finance, drawing merchants, capital, and attention away from Venice. Venetian trade colonies in the eastern Mediterranean faced increased pressure from Ottoman expansion, piracy, and rival commercial powers. As the city's profits declined, the state struggled to maintain its extensive maritime infrastructure, its fleets, and its administrative apparatus. The decline in economic resources also affected patronage of the arts, public works, and architecture, although Venice's cultural vibrancy remained remarkable even in this period. Political and military challenges further accelerated Venice's decline. The city had long relied on diplomacy, strategic alliances, and naval power to maintain independence and protect its interests. However, the balance of power in Europe was shifting. Venice faced increasingly aggressive neighbors, including the Habsburgs in the north and the Ottoman Empire to the east. Conflicts over territorial holdings, trade privileges, and maritime dominance placed considerable strain on the city's resources. Wars such as the War of the League of Cambrai in the early 16th century, in which a coalition of European powers sought to curb Venetian expansion, highlighted both the vulnerabilities and the resilience of the Republic. While Venice ultimately survived these conflicts, they revealed the limits of its military and political power in a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. Internally, Venice also confronted social and political challenges. The oligarchic structure that had served the city well for centuries, governed by a network of elite merchant families and overseen by councils, magistracies, and the Doge, began to show signs of rigidity. Wealth and power were concentrated in the hands of a relatively small aristocracy, while social mobility for other citizens was limited. Economic decline exacerbated tensions between the elite and lower classes, creating pressures that required careful management. The government responded with a combination of legal reform, ceremonial displays of authority, and regulation of commerce and labor, but the underlying challenges of maintaining social cohesion in a declining economy were difficult to overcome. Environmental factors also contributed to Venice's transformation. The city had always been intimately tied to the lagoon, but changes in water levels, sedimentation, and flooding patterns increasingly threatened infrastructure, agriculture, and navigation. Rising tides and subsidence of the land created ongoing challenges for urban planning and engineering. Maintaining canals, bridges, embankments, and foundations became increasingly labor-intensive and costly. Venice's success had long depended on its ability to manipulate its environment, but as resources became more constrained, sustaining the city's infrastructure required greater ingenuity and effort. The cultural and artistic life of Venice continued to flourish during this period, even as political and economic power waned. Patrons, institutions, and wealthy families continued to commission works of art, architecture, and literature that reflected the city's identity and values. Artists such as Veronese and Guardi produced masterpieces that celebrated Venice's history, civic pride, and spiritual devotion. Public spaces, palaces, and churches continued to be adorned with mosaics, sculptures, and paintings that reinforced a sense of continuity, resilience, and aesthetic grandeur. Venice remained a beacon of culture, demonstrating that the decline of political and economic power did not necessarily entail the collapse of intellectual or artistic achievement. One of the most dramatic moments in Venice's transformation came in the late 18th century with the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. By this time, Venice's political autonomy had become increasingly vulnerable to external forces. In 1797, after centuries of independence, the Venetian Republic was formally dissolved by Napoleon, marking the end of over 1,000 years of self-governance. The Treaty of Campo Formio ceded Venice to the Austrian Empire, ending the city's role as an independent maritime power. This event represented not only a political shift but also a profound cultural and psychological change for Venetians, who had long prided themselves on their autonomy, ingenuity, and maritime dominance. Despite the formal loss of independence, Venice's identity, culture, and urban landscape persisted. The city's architecture, canals, palaces, and churches continued to define its character, preserving a sense of continuity in history even as political circumstances changed. Venetian society adapted to new rulers and administrative systems, while local customs, religious practices, and artistic traditions remained deeply ingrained. Venice's transformation was not an abrupt collapse, but a gradual adaptation to changing economic, political, and environmental conditions. The city's legacy endured, demonstrating the resilience of culture and identity even in the face of political subjugation. Venice's decline also had profound effects on its maritime empire. Former colonies and trading posts were lost to rival powers or absorbed into the Ottoman sphere of influence. The city's naval dominance diminished, and its capacity to project power beyond the lagoon was reduced. Nevertheless, Venice retained important commercial and diplomatic connections, leveraging its reputation, networks, and expertise to remain relevant in regional and international affairs. The city's ability to maintain influence, even as direct power waned, underscores the enduring sophistication and adaptability of its institutions. Economically, Venice experienced a shift from its previous dominance in long-distance trade to a more localized and diversified economy. While luxury goods from the East were no longer the primary source of wealth, Venice became a center for manufacturing, finance, and services that supported regional commerce. Shipbuilding, glassmaking on Murano, textile production, and artisan crafts continued to sustain the city, while banking and finance adapted to new patterns of trade and investment. Venice's ability to reinvent aspects of its economy allowed it to survive as a commercial and cultural hub, even when its position at the center of global trade had eroded. Socially, the city faced the challenge of preserving cohesion and identity amidst economic change and political subjugation. Elite families sought to maintain their influence through marriage alliances, patronage, and participation in civic and religious institutions. Guilds, confraternities, and professional associations continued to regulate trade and craft, ensuring continuity in skills and expertise. Popular culture, festivals, and religious observances reinforced a sense of community and identity, providing stability in a period of transformation. Venice's social resilience allowed the city to maintain its distinct character, even as external circumstances shifted dramatically. Religious institutions continued to play a central role in Venice's transformation. Churches, monasteries, and charitable organizations provided education, social services, and spiritual guidance, reinforcing civic cohesion and moral order. Religious festivals, processions, and rituals served as occasions for public participation, celebration, and reinforcement of communal identity. Even as political structures changed, Venice's religious life remained a stabilizing force, linking the city's past with its present and preserving a sense of continuity across generations. Art and culture became particularly important during Venice's period of decline. Wealthy patrons and institutions invested in the arts as a means of asserting identity, preserving tradition, and celebrating civic pride. Venetian painters, architects, and sculptors continued to produce masterpieces that reflected both historical legacy and contemporary innovation. Literature, music, and theater flourished, offering both entertainment and moral instruction. The city's cultural vibrancy demonstrated that even in decline, Venice remained a center of human creativity, capable of inspiring and influencing generations beyond its borders. Venice's architectural landscape also reflected the city's transformation. Palaces, churches, and public buildings were maintained, renovated, or repurposed to suit new social and political realities. Infrastructure projects, including canal maintenance, embankment reinforcement, and public works, adapted to changing resources and priorities. Urban planning evolved to accommodate shifts in population, commerce, and governance, reflecting the city's capacity for pragmatic adaptation. Even as political independence waned, the physical fabric of Venice preserved its historical identity and aesthetic coherence. Education and scholarship persisted during this period, sustaining intellectual life and civic knowledge. Universities, libraries, and informal learning networks provided venues for study, research, and debate. Scholars, diplomats, and merchants continued to engage with global knowledge, ensuring that Venice remained intellectually connected to broader European and Mediterranean currents. This emphasis on education and intellectual engagement contributed to the city's resilience, fostering innovation, critical thinking, and adaptability, even in times of economic and political contraction. By the 19th century, Venice had become a city in transition, adapting to the realities of foreign rule, economic change, and environmental pressures. Its independence was gone, but its culture, infrastructure, and identity remained remarkably intact. The city had shifted from being a dominant maritime empire to a regional hub of commerce, art, and tourism, demonstrating the enduring relevance of its historical legacy. Venice's ability to navigate these transformations highlights the interplay between adaptation, resilience, and the preservation of identity in the face of profound change. Despite the decline in political and economic power, Venice retained its symbolic and cultural significance. The city continued to inspire artists, writers, and travelers who marveled at its canals, palaces, and history. Venice's legacy as a maritime power, cultural hub, and center of innovation endured, influencing urban planning, trade practices, governance models, and artistic expression across Europe and beyond. The city's story demonstrates that even in decline, a civilization can leave an indelible mark on the world, shaping culture, commerce, and human imagination for centuries. Ultimately, Venice's period of decline and transformation illustrates the complexity of historical change. Decline was neither absolute nor uniform. It was intertwined with adaptation, innovation, and preservation. The city's leaders, institutions, and citizens responded to shifting trade routes, political pressures, environmental challenges, and social dynamics with creativity, resilience, and pragmatism. Venice remained vibrant culturally, socially, and intellectually, even as its direct economic and political power waned. The decline of Venice is a story not of failure but of transformation. It shows how societies can endure, preserve identity, and adapt in the face of shifting circumstances. The city's experience underscores the importance of flexibility, foresight, and cultural continuity in sustaining communities across generations. Venice remained a symbol of human ingenuity, resilience, and artistry, demonstrating that the value of a civilization cannot be measured solely by its political or economic dominance. Even today, Venice stands as a testament to this legacy. Its canals, bridges, palaces, and churches reflect centuries of human ingenuity and adaptation. Its art, literature, and scholarship continue to inspire. The city's history reminds us that decline can coexist with cultural flourishing, and that transformation, when guided by vision and resilience, can preserve the essence of a civilization long after its political power has faded. The story in this period is one of endurance, adaptation, and the enduring power of human creativity, a city that reinvented itself while holding on to the spirit that had made it great. Venice today stands as a city of paradoxes, a city frozen in time yet constantly adapting, a city shaped by water yet resisting the forces that threaten to consume it, a city whose past grandeur contrasts sharply with the modern realities of tourism, environmental pressures, and urban management. To understand Venice in the 21st century is to recognize the layers of history that define it, the resilience that has allowed it to endure, and the ongoing challenges that shape its future. Venice is no longer the maritime empire that once commanded the Mediterranean, nor the financial hub that once dominated trade with the East, yet its identity, culture, and symbolic significance remain unparalleled. The city's physical layout continues to reflect its unique history. Canals crisscross the islands, carrying water taxis, gondolas, and small boats, preserving the transportation network that has defined Venice for centuries. Bridges arch gracefully over canals, connecting neighborhoods that have retained names and traditions dating back to medieval times. The Grand Canal serves as the main thoroughfare, lined with palaces, churches, and commercial buildings whose facades testify to the city's wealth, taste, and cosmopolitan past. Even in modern times, Venice remains an architectural marvel, where every building tells a story of artistic ambition, commercial success, or civic pride. Venice's urban fabric is inseparable from its environment. The lagoon that protects the city also threatens it, as rising sea levels, climate change, and sinking foundations create constant challenges. Flooding, locally known as acqua alta, has become an increasingly frequent and severe phenomenon, inundating streets, piazzas, and historic buildings. In response, engineers and planners have developed elaborate flood barriers, embankments, and water management systems designed to mitigate the impact of high tides. These interventions, while modern, echo centuries of Venetian ingenuity in adapting to the lagoon. Venetians have always understood that their city's survival depends on a delicate balance with the water, and contemporary challenges reinforce the necessity of vigilance, innovation, and cooperation. Tourism is one of the defining aspects of contemporary Venice. Millions of visitors from around the world flock to the city each year, drawn by its canals, historic architecture, art, and cultural heritage. Tourism is both a blessing and a challenge. It sustains the local economy and provides opportunities for employment and cultural exchange. Yet it also strains infrastructure, alters daily life for residents, and threatens the preservation of historic sites. Venice has become a living museum in many respects, where modern commerce, hospitality, and culture intersect with centuries of history. The balance between welcoming visitors and maintaining authenticity is a central concern for city planners, residents, and heritage organizations. Venice's cultural life remains remarkably vibrant. The city continues to host festivals, exhibitions, and performances that celebrate its history and creativity. Events such as the Venice Biennale and the Venice Film Festival attract global attention, positioning the city as a contemporary center of art, innovation, and discourse. Traditional music, theater, and crafts are preserved through schools, workshops, and guilds, ensuring that skills passed down over generations remain alive. Venice's artistic and intellectual legacy, nurtured over centuries, continues to thrive even as the city confronts modern challenges, demonstrating the resilience of culture and identity in the face of change. The city's economy, once dominated by maritime trade and commerce, has adapted to contemporary realities. Tourism, hospitality, and artisan crafts now drive economic activity, while traditional industries such as glassmaking on Murano and lace production on Burano continue to sustain specialized skills and maintain cultural heritage. Venice also functions as a hub for international scholarship, research, and heritage preservation, with universities, museums, and institutions dedicated to studying and protecting its unique environment and history. The city has become a center for knowledge about water management, conservation, and urban resilience, linking past expertise with present innovation. Venice's political and administrative structure has transformed in response to modern governance demands. While the city no longer operates as an independent republic, municipal and regional authorities manage urban planning, cultural preservation, and infrastructure projects. International cooperation plays a significant role, as UNESCO and other heritage organizations monitor preservation efforts and advocate for sustainable tourism and environmental protection. Venice's legacy of governance, which once relied on councils, magistracies, and the Doge, now informs a contemporary approach to balancing preservation, modernization, and civic life. Education and scholarship remain central to Venice's contemporary identity. Universities, research centers, and cultural institutions attract students, scholars, and professionals from around the world. Venice is not merely a site of historical interest, it is a living laboratory for the study of architecture, art history, environmental science, urban planning, and cultural heritage management. Scholars study not only Venice's past achievements, but also its contemporary challenges, using the city as a case study in resilience, adaptation, and sustainable urban management. The city's intellectual life is therefore both a continuation of its historic identity and a platform for innovation and problem-solving. Venice's social fabric has also transformed over the centuries. While the population has declined compared to its historic peak, the city maintains vibrant communities that preserve local traditions, cuisine, dialects, and practices. Residents navigate the balance between living in a historic city and engaging with global tourism and commerce. Community organizations, cultural associations, and local initiatives work to maintain identity, support residents, and foster engagement with the city's history and culture. This continuity of social cohesion ensures that Venice remains not only a site for visitors, but also a living, breathing city with active civic life. Religious and spiritual life continues to play a role in Venice's identity. Historic churches, monasteries, and religious festivals provide continuity with the past, linking contemporary Venetians with centuries of tradition. Public celebrations, processions, and rituals remain central to civic life, reinforcing shared identity and collective memory. Venice's religious heritage is also a major attraction for scholars, tourists, and devotees, reflecting the city's historical role as a center of faith and culture. Venice's cultural and artistic legacy continues to influence contemporary architecture, design, and urban planning. Its combination of Gothic, Byzantine, and Renaissance elements offers lessons in integrating beauty, functionality, and resilience in urban environments. Modern architects, artists, and planners draw inspiration from Venice's adaptation to its environment, its balance of public and private space, and its integration of water, light, and circulation in urban design. The city serves as a model for thinking about sustainability, heritage preservation, and urban creativity in a global context. Environmental concerns remain a central challenge. Rising sea levels, subsidence, pollution, and the effects of tourism require innovative solutions. Venice's response includes not only engineering projects such as the Meuse flood barrier system, but also initiatives in ecological restoration, water quality management, and sustainable tourism. These modern interventions reflect a centuries-old Venetian understanding of the environment, that survival and prosperity are inseparable from careful observation, adaptation, and management of natural forces. The city's ongoing relationship with water continues to define its identity and future. Venice's historical legacy also continues to shape global imagination. Its canals, palaces, and art have inspired countless works of literature, painting, film, and music. Writers from Goethe to Byron, filmmakers from Visconti to Coppola, and composers from Vivaldi to contemporary artists have drawn on Venice's beauty, history, and atmosphere. The city's image has become symbolic of romance, elegance, mystery, and resilience, demonstrating how a place can transcend its physical and political boundaries to influence culture on a global scale. The city's museums, libraries, and archives preserve centuries of knowledge, art, and documentation. Institutions such as the Peggy Guggenheim Collection, the Museo Correr, and the Biblioteca Nazionale Marciana provide access to Venetian art, history, and scholarship, connecting past achievements with contemporary understanding. These collections ensure that Venice's intellectual and cultural contributions continue to educate, inspire, and inform audiences worldwide. Venice's identity today is also shaped by the interplay between preservation and innovation. While maintaining historical authenticity is crucial, the city must also accommodate modern life, commerce, and technology. Balancing heritage with contemporary needs requires careful urban planning, innovative engineering, and civic participation. Venice's approach demonstrates how historical cities can survive and thrive by combining respect for tradition with adaptive strategies for modern challenges. The legacy of Venice is not confined to the city itself. Its contributions to trade, governance, art, architecture, and diplomacy have influenced cities and societies around the world. Venetian innovations in finance, legal systems, and urban planning have been adopted in various contexts, while its artistic achievements continue to shape global aesthetic standards. Venice's history offers lessons in resilience, creativity, and the integration of commerce, culture, and governance. Lessons that remain relevant for contemporary societies facing environmental, economic, and political challenges.